A corkscrew twisted once, then again, and someone paid the price. Welcome to Weird Script Den. I am your host, Denora. Share where you're tuning in from below. I love seeing this community grow. Now let's begin the mystery. It was a Tuesday, which in our line of business means nothing unless someone decides to make it mean something. The rain had been at it since morning, needling the windows of the brownstone, and I'd given up on persuading Wolfe to step outside his beloved orchids for even a 5-minute stretch. I had resigned myself to reading the evening edition in the office, feet on the corner of Wolfe's desk just far enough to keep him from barking, when the bell rang. Fritz answered, and a moment later ushered in a gentleman who looked as if he had made a wrong turn into the wrong kind of jungle. He was wiry, middle-aged, and had the harassed expression of a man who had long since given up trying to convince anyone of his dignity. He carried a leather case tucked against his ribs like it held the nuclear codes. "Mr. Nero Wolfe?" he asked, eyes darting past me toward the door that led to the plant rooms. Wolfe chose that exact moment to emerge, wiping his hands on a towel Fritz had no doubt supplied. He gave the visitor a glance that weighed, measured, and filed him under nuisance. "Yes," Wolfe said, lowering himself into the big chair. "You are?" "Julian Cray," the man said. He set his case down carefully and looked as though his backbone might splinter under the pressure of Wolfe's silence. "I'm a collector, wine, 19th century vintages. I know someone is sabotaging me." I raised an eyebrow. "Sabotaging wine?" He flicked me a glance, annoyed I had spoken. "Yes, 2 bottles in my private cellar have been tampered with. Not stolen, mind you, altered, switched, the corks reseated. And last night—" He broke off, fumbling with the clasps of the case. When it popped open, he withdrew a corkscrew. Not just any corkscrew. Brass ornate, coiled like a serpent swallowing its tail. This was planted on my cellar table, not mine. I've never seen it before. I'll admit it had presence, like a stage prop begging for a curtain. Wolfe observed it with the same expression he might give to a dandelion growing in his orchid house. "Phoy, why come to me? A locksmith, a butler, or the police?" Cray's throat worked. "Because last night when I touched this thing, I received a call. A voice told me, 'The corkscrew twists twice. Tonight again.' Then the line went dead. I couldn't help myself. Somebody's got a flair for drama." Cray's eyes darted to Wolfe. "I don't know what they intend, but I do know my collection, my reputation, my life's work is being threatened. And if anyone can understand the seriousness of precision violated, it is you, Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe's lips compressed. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Humph." That grunt was as close to interest as he gave most people on first encounter. I caught the flicker of calculation in Wolfe's eyes, though. The man might have sounded like a lunatic, but Wolfe had perked at the words precision violated. He was hooked, though he'd sooner swallow glass than admit it right away. For me, I smelled 2 things, trouble and overtime. Wolfe told Fritz to take the brass serpent to the safe and not to let it fraternize with anything else. Fritz tiptoed with it as if it might bite. Cray tracked it with his eyes, the way a man watches a surgeon carry away a piece of him he isn't sure he can live without. Wolfe settled an extra inch into the chair, which meant he had conceded the existence of the problem, if not his role in it. "Chronology," he said. "Without embroidery." Cray swallowed and nodded. "Last Thursday I hosted a tasting at my townhouse on East 73rd. Private, 10 guests, all known to me. The bottles were an 1899 Romanée Conti and an 1870 Lafite. They had been authenticated when I acquired them, sealed, stored properly. No one in the cellar except my cellar master and me." His fingers worried the edge of the leather case as he talked. "We opened the Lafite first. It was wrong. The bouquet died in the glass. The Romanée Conti we saved for last. It looked right, smelled right, and then the finish went hollow. Not corked, not heat damaged, hollow." He blew out a breath. 2 days later I inspected both bottles. The corks were reseated. Imperceptibly to the eye, but they were. Someone uncorked, interfered, and dressed them up again. "Interfered how?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know yet. There was a faint scent of beeswax on the cork of the Lafite, none on the Burgundy. The ullage lines matched my notes. The Romané's cork had a pinprick I didn't make. Wolfe's lids drooped. Names. Cray obliged with the sort of reluctance men reserve for wills and confessions. Victor Almeida, my cellar master, meticulous with me for 6 years. Phoebe Lane, my publicist. She begged me not to make a scene about the fiasco. Lionel Dane, a rival collector whose entire personality is a dare. Dr. Elsa Muir, an oonologist, our authenticator on retainer. Kenji Okada, an investor in my tasting series, more enthusiasm than palate. Nico Barash, an importer, useful connections, questionable scruples. Mara Selwyn, my former business partner, she thinks I owe her half my soul. The rest were patrons without access to the cellar. Wolfe's mouth made a small line. And the call? Yesterday evening, 9:42. A man's voice, low and amused. The corkscrew twists twice. Tonight again. Then the line went dead. And you came here, I put in. Because if you got a second act scheduled for tonight, you want company that can applaud in the right places. Cray's harried eyes flicked to me. I came because if this is what I think it is, it's not mischief. It's sabotage designed to destroy my credibility. I've built my reputation over 20 years. 1 laughable tasting and I'm a joke. 2 and I'm finished. Wolfe shut his eyes briefly, which can mean anything from I am asleep to the human race has let me down again. When he opened them, they had the glint I recognized from the rare moments he agreed. Mathematics could be entertaining. Mr. Goodwin will go to your cellar this evening, he said. He will observe and deter discreetly. He held up a finger when Cray started to gush. First, you will leave here and you will not return to your home. You will telephone your Miss Lane and instruct her to bring to me a list of your 10 guests with addresses and occupations, your staff roster, and your cellar access logs for the past month. She will come immediately. Cray hesitated. Phoebe is... She doesn't like... She will come immediately, Wolfe repeated, and made the mistake of glancing toward the clock, which let me know he had just budgeted his next half hour and I wasn't in it. The doorbell rang again, as if the brownstone had been waiting for its cue. Fritz padded out. Wolfe's left eyebrow rose at me in a way I can translate. If that is Miss Lane, the cosmos has decided to save everyone time. If it is not, the cosmos can go to the devil. It was Miss Lane. She came in with rain in her hair and a folder under her arm and took one survey of the office that said she had been in better rooms and worse moods. A good-looking woman in her 30s with the efficient sharpness of a paper knife. She nodded to Cray without warmth, and to me with the kind of smile that files you under necessary obstacle. Her umbrella dripped once on the carpet. Wolfe watched the droplet as if it had violated zoning regulations. You're Nero Wolfe, she said, like she was checking an item off a list. Mr. Cray says you want the guest list and logs. I brought them. Also press clippings on Dane's little vendetta, and a write-up of Dr. Muir's last authentication for us. No copy for you to keep, she tapped the folder. You can look. You will sit, Wolfe said, and you will moderate your effusions. Mr. Goodwin, the folder. I took it. The guest list was clean. Names, professions, a note or two from Phoebe in a brisk hand. Dane with a notation, picked a fight with Cray at fundraiser last month over fakes. Dr. Muir, meticulous, offended easily. Okada, moneyed, wants to be seen. Barash, useful but watch him. Almeida had a separate sheet, cellar key control, entries timed and signed. There were photocopied access logs with tidy columns, the kind you get when someone likes their pen too much. A gap on Sunday, which I flagged with a finger. Sunday? I asked. Cray spread his hands. Closed to visitors. Victor and I were at a charity luncheon in Yonkers. I checked the cameras after the tasting fiasco. No entries logged. No one. Cameras, I said. You bring footage? Phoebe sniffed. The system went down for 2 hours Thursday afternoon. The vendor blames a software update. Wolfe made the smallest sound in his throat. If you don't know him, you miss it. I didn't. Mr. Goodwin, you will attend at 7 o'clock, he said. You will be present in the cellar unseen when Mr. Almeida performs his duties. You will keep out of the way, keep your mouth shut until you must open it, and keep your eyes open regardless. Always my plan, I said. Do I get to drink anything? No, Wolfe said with feeling. You will also secure the telephony. The call yesterday. Mr. Cray, you will permit Mr. Goodwin to inspect your logs and devices. Cray nodded, relieved to be told what to do. Phoebe wasn't relieved. She was annoyed. You're not going to accuse Victor, are you? She asked, and then grimaced at herself for asking it. Wolfe didn't dignify that. Miss Lane, you will describe your interest. She gave me a glance that asked whether he always made it feel like confession. I manage Mr. Cray's public profile. If word of Thursday's fiasco spreads uncontrolled, we're finished in the next fortnight. I want this contained, preferably with a villain I can feed the press if necessary. Ah, Wolfe allowed himself the ghost of sarcasm. Justice, brand forward, very well. See that Mr. Cray is not at home until Mr. Goodwin has concluded. When they had gone, Phoebe leaving the scent of a storm and a memo in the air, Wolfe let the office breathe again. He lifted the phone and told Saul Panzer to be available. He didn't instruct, which meant he wasn't ready to need him, but he wanted the comfort of proximity. Then he told Fritz to inform him when dinner could be had without haste. That meant he expected to feed on time and think on schedule. I took the brass serpent from the safe before I left, because if you're going to a cellar where mischief is promised, you bring the prop the mischief maker likes. On the underside of the handle there was a hairline scratch, delicate and recent, that had caught a flake of something, red, not quite wax, not quite lipstick. I scraped it with a fingernail and sniffed. Resin, faint and floral, the kind some people use to dress corks that don't want to behave. Also under the helix tip, the thinnest smear of sediment you only get when you've gone through Old Bordeaux, iron filings of time. If our serpent had never met Mr. Cray before, it had met his bottle's cousins. Outside, the rain had turned to a thin perseverance. I stood on the stoop and took a quick look across the street. There was a sedan with a driver who had a professional indifference to being watched, which means he had been paid to cultivate it. He lit a cigarette he didn't want. When our eyes met, he looked past me at the rain as if he had been studying precipitation for years. I filed the plate and walked toward the corner for a cab. Back inside, Wolfe would be constructing one of his lattices of necessity, running the names along the crossbeams and seeing where they caught. My job was to go let the corkscrew twist where someone wanted it to, and be ready when it tried for the second turn. Cray's townhouse had the kind of frontage that said old money hired new glass. The street wore the same damp as our block, and the same grey sedan idled half a house down with a driver who had perfected the art of being furniture. He was on his phone doing nothing with commitment. When I looked at him, he went all in on scenery. Victor Almeida opened the door himself. He was mid-40s, trim with the grave air of a man who had memorized thousands of bottles and would be personally offended if you called them booze. He just looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a relative who wants to hold the scalpel. Mr. Goodwin, he said. Miss Lane called. You are to observe and deter. He did not put quotes around the words. His mouth did it for him. Lucky me, I said. Let's start with the phone call. 9:42 last night. He led me past a politely suffering foyer into a sitting room with more silk than conversation. On a console, a landline base unit blinked like it had not enjoyed the attention. He produced a printed call log from a drawer. Miss Lane's efficiency had bred and multiplied. Private number, he said. Repeated unknowns on Thursday as well, around 2 in the afternoon. Then the camera outage, which the vendor blames on gremlins. I said, Okay, show me the cellar. We went down. The air changed, cool, breathing through stone and time. The racks were orderly, labels facing like soldiers, aisles wide enough for men who carry reverence in both hands. On a workbench sat the tools of the careful trade. Foils, awls, a hand borer, soft cloths, a loop, natural beeswax in a small tin, and a stamp with Cray's crest for sealing his special theatrics. I set the brass serpent down among them. It looked comfortable, which I didn't enjoy. Victor watched my hand and not the serpent. That is not mine, I gathered. Tell me Thursday. He stood straighter, the way men do when they have rehearsed their testimony for their conscience. Mr. Cray and I brought up the Lafitte at 6. I stood it upright for an hour to settle, then decanted by candle. I expected a miracle. It was muted. I blamed the bottle. Then the Burgundy. We opened it at 8:30. At first it sang. By 9 the finish collapsed. After the guests I logged the bottles, recorked with neutral closures for storage. On Saturday I checked the original corks and found them changed. Someone had reintroduced the original closures to disguise an intervention. You left these tools out? I do not leave tools out, he said mildly. I have a system. He opened a drawer that would have pleased a watchmaker, each item nested in a velvet channel. The space for the hand borer was occupied. The bench held a second identical borer with a different patina. 2 borers, I said. You own one? Yes, I took both, weighed them. The steel on one, had microscopic scratches near the tip that told of someone who worked at a slant. The other had honest wear. "You keep a log for this room?" He handed me a clipboard with times and initials. Thursday's outage had a partner. Sunday, a blank gap that dared you to be suspicious. "You're here all the time?" "Except Sunday lunch." Mr. Cray could not be persuaded that charity food is not food. "Did anyone else have reason to be in here yesterday?" He hesitated the way a careful man does when he has to say something careless. Dr. Muir texted to ask if she could pick up 2 samples for comparative analysis. I said no. We do not let samples leave without Mr. Cray's consent. She replied that she would arrange a time. "Tonight?" "I do not know." He began setting up as if nothing were wrong. 2 modest Bordeaux for a client appointment that was now cancelled. He moved with a craftsman's economy. You could tell his hands had learned these angles by heart. I made a slow circuit. By the 3rd rack I found a flake of wax that didn't match the tin, harder, with a faint floral note same as the smear I'd scraped from the serpent. On the floor under the bench, a grit of glass the size of a lentil winked at me. Clear, curved, the kind you get when an ampule loses an argument with a heel. "Break anything?" I asked. "No. Mind if I borrow your broom?" I didn't sweep. I stooped and plucked the grit into an envelope from my pocket. "Call it a souvenir." At 7:20, Victor checked his watch with the ceremony of a man signing an oath. "I will go upstairs to confirm the main door is locked and that the alarm for the rear yard is set. I will be 5 minutes. I will be 5 minutes. "Go be 5 minutes," I said. "I'll practice my breathing." When he was gone, I moved the serpent from the bench to a lower shelf, where a hand might reach for it in habit. I killed the far row of lights and took a position behind a rack that offered a cathedral view of the bench through the bottle's oval shoulders. The cellar hummed quietly, a polite machine. Somewhere above, rain ticked impatiently at the world. Footsteps came, then paused. A key slid into the lock, with a hesitance that said it belonged there but hadn't been used much by this particular hand. The door opened the width of a shoulder. A figure eased in, closing quietly, the way people do when they know where the squeaks are. Not Victor, smaller, a raincoat dark, the hood down. A scent moved ahead of them, a whisper of something resinous and floral. I didn't breathe with my nose. It's an old trick. They crossed to the bench with unstudied precision and put down a small case. Gloves thin appeared. The lid came up and showed a row of ampules and 2 needles, fine enough to stitch a thought. The hand reached to the shelf where I'd set the serpent, hesitated, then left it, choosing the familiar. Their own micro-borer, sleek and used to their grip. The ampule caught the light, and the liquid inside was the color of something harmless, which is how you sell harm to a bottle. They worked fast, neat. The borer kissed the cork of a mid-tier bottle as a test and went in with barely a sigh. A drop, too, went dancing down the helix into the old oak. The cork reseated. The foil smoothed. I took 2 shots on my phone. The shutter was off and the screen dark. But you never trust a battery to keep a secret, so I kept my distance. When the ampule went back in the case, the figure reached for the serpent after all, reflex or mischief, and their glove brushed the scratch under the handle. They paused, tilted it, then put it down where I'd left it. A small acknowledgement to the stage manager. I cleared my throat. It was not dramatic. It was practical. They froze, then turned their head just enough for me to see a slice of profile in the bottle glass. Female, the edge of a cheekbone like it had opinions, hair tucked behind one ear. The left glove reached for the case, the right for the door. I stepped out of the aisle because I hate running in cellars. The right hand flicked the light switch near the door. The bulbs obediently died to a gloom that taught you how much you love electricity. By the time my eyes compensated, the door had closed with a careful prayer. I crossed in 4. The lock was engaged from the outside. The case was gone. On the bench, a single glove sat like an argument someone had decided to continue later. It was black, thin, made for dexterity. Inside the wrist, stitched in pale thread, was the manufacturer's name and a size. No initials, no gift tags from Santa. Victor's key hit the lock from the hall. He came in, saw me at the door, saw the glove, and went white the way dark men do when the blood goes home to think. "What have you done?" he said, soft and dangerous. "Observed," I said. "Deterring comes second." I let them show me how," I said, and held up the glove. Now you'll tell me whether Dr. Muir wears a scent that thinks it's a flower shop, whether Miss Selwyn believes in handling things personally, or whether Mr. Dane has a lady friend who likes practical jokes. And then we'll decide which bottle tonight was supposed to die, because if you can't tell me, I can tell you. It's the one that looks identical to the one they touched last Thursday. People repeat themselves when they're proud of the trick. From upstairs the landline rang once, then stopped, like a reminder. The sedan's engine outside changed tone. A slight rev, the kind drivers practice when they're listening for footsteps. I pocketed the glove and the second borer, and Victor's outrage found its proper target. Not me, but the fact of violation. He went to the rack and pulled a Bordeaux with hands that didn't shake. He held it to his nose without opening, and then nodded as if he had just recognized a cousin by a scar. "This one," he said. "They meant this one." "Good," I said. "Then we won't drink it. We'll keep it the way it is, and show it to a man who can turn hollowness into a confession." Victor boxed the bottle like a relic, with a padded cradle and the muttered promises men make to saints. I had him initial the tape and log the time. If this game ended in an office gathering and a speech, Wolfe would want no one able to claim we'd played three-card Monte with the props. We went upstairs. The landline blinked another missed call from unknown, like a wink you didn't want to return. "Don't answer those unless I'm sitting," I told Victor. "If the voice rings again, I'd like it to land where it can be useful." "Useful to whom?" he asked, but he wasn't expecting tender assurances. He wanted someone to tell him the mathematics would come out. "I'm not Nero Wolfe, but I can add. I called Wolfe from the foyer." He listened with the silence he reserves for matters that might annoy him by not being difficult enough. When I got to the part about the intruder and the ampule, he grunted, "Which is Wolfe for continue." And when I described the glove and the borer, he said, "Describe the wear." "Micro-scratches near the tip, slanting down from right to left, shallow, consistent. Left-handed user," he said. "Someone who drills without correcting for the tremor of handedness." The floral resin, acacia gum. Some oenologists use it to adjust mouthfeel and to gloss over astringency. In excess, it occludes the persistence of the finish. "The hollow," Mr. Cray lamented. His breath made a small, dissatisfied gust. "To use it to injure a rival's tasting is crude, but effective with theatrics. Bring the bottle and the glove. Mr. Panzer will take the watcher in the sedan." "Already present," I said, and gave him the plate. I could hear Wolfe's pencil still for a half-beat, then resume. He told me to leave Victor with instructions that would keep him from improvising, and to wait on the sidewalk long enough to hand Saul the thread. I told Victor two things: don't touch the bench, and if Miss Lane called, say only that we were handling it. She didn't need to hear the word ampule tonight. He agreed with a dignity that had been battered but not broken. On the way out, I took one more look at the console phone and jotted the last digits of the unknown that had tried us. It was blocked, but fate is rarely thorough. The last four showed. Sometimes they match a burner block. Sometimes they tickle a memory. At that moment, they tickled nothing but my patience. The grey sedan had wriggled half a car length closer to the hydrant, which suggested it had received a text that made it eager. The driver's cigarette had burned to air and attitude. I strolled close enough to fog his window with my breath and gave him a crisp, friendly nod that said we should both pretend we were invisible. He pretended with feeling. Saul's taxi ghosted in like a practical thought and stopped at the corner. I leaned into his window long enough to plant the plate and the sketch of the woman's profile, such as I had it through glass and gloom, slim jaw, hair tucked, careful movements. Saul's eyes took it in like a camera that doesn't run out of film. He didn't salute. He never does. The cab slid on, and 3 blocks down the sedan unpeeled from the curb as smoothly as a man leaving a poker table without touching his winnings. We had a thread in motion. That was enough. My business was elsewhere. Back at the brownstone, Fritz met me with a look that asked whether the world had behaved as expected, which is to say, badly. I put the padded crate on Wolfe's desk and set the glove and the borer on a blotter, as if they might decide to reproduce. Wolfe didn't touch them. He leaned forward just enough to persuade gravity to do some smelling for him. Fritz withdrew without being told. He knows when tools come out that aren't culinary. "The glove," Wolfe said. "Size?" 6.5, I said. "Branded Odile, sold to labs and certain finicky salons. You want me to see where else they sell them?" "In the morning," he said. Tonight you will ask Miss Lane to arrange interviews. The cellarmaster first, then Dr. Muir, then Miss Selwyn. Mr. Dane can pant until he is summoned, and pant until he is... You're putting the onologist ahead of the ex-partner, I said. I am putting the technician who has means ahead of the strategist who has cause, he said, and looked almost bored with me for making him say the obvious. The left hand, Archie. Dr. Muir is left-handed. She notes it in her published papers because she writes on method, the resin. The economy of motion you describe. If she did this herself, she is a fool. If she did not, someone is at pains to make me say her name too soon. I will not. I will arrange that she makes me say the right one at the right time. Saul will make us smarter, I said. Mr. Panzer will make us informed, he corrected. Smarter will be our contribution, Fritz. Fritz appeared as if he had been folded into the wainscoting. Wolfe directed him to keep the office clear in the morning, and then to provide coffee that did not pretend to be Italian. If this sounded like logistics for a small invasion, it wasn't accidental. I called Phoebe Lane. She picked up on the second ring with a hello that had decided adjectives were a waste of time. I told her client had had a visitor in the cellar and that we had a bottle we did not plan to drink. You let someone break in, she said. That was the part of data you didn't underline. I underlined the part where we'd rather arrest the method than the shadow, I said. Wolfe wants Dr. Muir, Miss Selwyn, and Victor here tomorrow morning. Staggered half-hour starting at 10. He'll take Mr. Dane later. If you can get Barash and Okada comfortable with being available by phone at 11:30, he may let them avoid a face-to-face. Or not. Does he ever say please? She asked. Only to Fritz and Orchids, I said. And never in the same breath. She let out a breath that had been losing its edges since we began. I'll schedule. Dr. Muir may be difficult. Tell her Mr. Cray is prepared to discuss her retainer in the same room as Nero Wolfe, I said. The word retainer tends to clarify schedules. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't hang up hard. Progress. Wolfe was watching me with his eyes half closed. He does that when he wants me to say the thing I think I don't need to say. I obliged. The glove size suggests a small hand. Dr. Muir's are small. Miss Selwyn's are pianist long but not tiny. Phoebe's, Miss Lane, he said, does not do her own dirty work. She pays for it and itemizes. He tipped his head at the borer. The scratches. Did you verify Victor's handedness? Right, I said. His borer's ware told the same story, honest, centered, careful. Then we have a foreign instrument and a foreign hand, he said. Very good. The bottle. I opened the crate and let him see without breathing on it. The capsule still wore the tiny micro-puncture where the needle had kissed it. Wolfe looked without moving for so long I became part of the furniture. Mr. Goodwin, he said finally, you will put this in the safe. You will keep the glove and the alien borer in your pocket. If our visitor was as precise as you say, she will feel the loss. When people who have rehearsed something are forced to improvise, they become educable. Educable into mistakes, I said. Into honesty, he said, and reached for his beer. In the morning we will invite them to contradict themselves. The phone on his desk rang. Only a handful of numbers use that line, and none of them are bored. I picked up, Saul's voice low and composed. He had followed the sedan to a corner off Park. The driver stayed with the car. A woman in a raincoat went into a building that housed 3 floors of medical suites and a lab with Dr. Muir's name on the directory. 20 minutes later, she came out without the case she had carried in. Do you want me to knock? Saul asked. No, I said. We want her to come to us believing she can still steer. Wolfe's eyes were on me. I repeated it, stripped of garnish. He grunted approval. Anything else? I asked Saul. One thing, he said. When she crossed under the streetlight, she pushed her hair back with her left hand. We rang off. Wolfe didn't smile. He doesn't when the pieces ostentatiously obey. He just breathed a little better. Tomorrow, he said, we will let Dr. Muir advise us. Mr. Cray will bring his anguish. Miss Selwyn will bring her grievances. Mr. Dane will bring his ego. We will bring order. He finished his beer, set the glass down as if it had completed a lesson, and closed his eyes. And Archie, he added, lid staying shut, remind Fritz that Calves's liver is not improved by zeal. That was my dismissal and my dessert. Upstairs, rain resumed its patter lecture. The corkscrew on my desk, our brass serpent, gleamed with the satisfaction of an actor who has found its mark. It had twisted twice. Tomorrow, if Wolfe had his way, it would be coaxed into pointing. Morning came in grey flannel with coffee. Wolfe gave the day a nod by being at his desk 5 minutes before 10, which is as close as he gets to revelry. The office had the quiet of a courtroom before the bailiff says rise. Fritz had polished the brass serpent, which I would have bet against, and it sat on the safe like a smug paperweight. I put the glove and the alien borer in my pocket, where Wolfe wanted them. Close enough to work as props, far enough I wouldn't forget. I was supposed to be the one using them. Victor Almeida arrived on the dot with a tie that had learned humility overnight. Wolfe let him sit, and then started him on the alphabet and made him earn his way to Z. It isn't that Wolfe enjoys pain. He just insists words be put in the right places, and most people have to take the scenic route. Where were you Sunday at 1? With Mr. Cray in Yonkers. Who had keys to the cellar in the last year? I did, Mr. Cray did. Miss Selwyn had one while she was a partner. Surrendered when she left. A contractor had one last November and returned it. How many micro borers do you own? One. Then what is this? I showed him the alien borer. He took it like it had insulted his mother and examined the tip. Not mine, he said, and his voice didn't quaver. This is cut shallow and favors the left. Wolfe nodded once without looking up, which is his way of giving you a cookie without the calories. When I mentioned the resin again, Victor surprised me by not bristling at the implication. He was a craftsman, and resentment about tools going to bad uses is a separate shelf from professional pride. Acacia, he agreed. In the right hands, a minor dressing. In the wrong, a gag. He flicked his eyes at Wolfe and made himself say a thing he didn't want to want. Dr. Muir would know the quantities that would not be obvious on the nose until too late. So would Barish. He calls his tinkering correction. I call it vandalism. He calls it modern taste. What about Miss Selwyn? I asked. Keys means motive? He looked pained. Miss Selwyn knows my habits. She could move without knocking things awry. But she believes in theatre. If she wanted to ruin Mr. Cray, she would do it by making a noise, not by making a bottle quiet. Wolfe's eyelids made their imperceptible assent. You will wait outside, he said, and Victor went, grateful to put his sentences down. Dr. Elsa Muir came at 10:30, hair smooth, shoes practical, carrying a satchel that had paid off its student loans long ago. She shook with her left hand, because I offered her my left and didn't give her room to show off her right. She took the chair like it had been inspected for wobble, and had passed. Wolfe didn't pounce. He draped civility over her like a borrowed cloak, and then asked her to recount her relationship with Mr. Cray's collection, as if he had never met the word sabotage. She responded in paragraphs that had citations embedded in the grammar. She authenticated 3 significant purchases for Cray over 5 years, consulted occasionally on storage, and advised Victor on cork condition during a heat wave. She said Victor the way one says colleague, and Mr. Cray the way one says client who pays on time, but asks you to admire his taste. When I brought out the glove and set it on the edge of the desk, she looked at it long enough for honesty to decide whether to come. It's an Odile 6.5, she said. Common in labs that need tactility and cleanliness. It isn't mine. I wear 7s and my brand is Kleist. She said it without heat. She has had to say that is not my glove before about other things. Then she noticed the micro borer on the blotter, and for the first time her voice shortened. That tip has been modified, she said. Too fine for most corks. It will pierce and leave no feathering. You could pass a small volume without visible trauma if you were careful. Acacia gum? Wolfe asked, not looking at her and therefore seeing her better. In its proper place, a stabilizer, she said. In its improper place, a veil. If someone wished to hide a clumsy decant or mute a tannic shout, it might tempt. To wreck a Romane Conti, that's a felony of taste. She let out a breath. If you're asking whether I would do it, no. If you're asking whether I know how to do it, yes, and so do any number of importers and seller charlatans within a mile. Where were you at 9 last night? I asked it like a dentist. Routine needed, not personal. In my lab until 10, she said. I had a consult with a restaurateur whose list is falling apart. I can provide a calendar entry and a witness. She didn't overplay it. That's how you know people know the rules, your assistant. Wolfe asked. Anna Voigt, she said. Competent. She resents me less than most and my clients more than average. And left-handed. I said because if Wolfe was going to be delicate, someone had to do the dirty work. She is, Dr. Muir said, with the calm of a woman who had already noted which of her habits had made the guest list. She also has a sister who works for Mr. Barash 3 days a week. Wolfe let silence run until it had gathered enough authority to speak for him. "What did Mr. Dane want when he telephoned you the day before the tasting?" he asked at last. She blinked once. "She's economical. He wanted me to audit Mr. Cray's cellar," she said. "He couched it as a service to the gullible." I declined. "He smirks when he talks. It is not a preference of mine." That went into Wolfe's lattice. He let her go with a courtesy that could have been mistaken for respect if you hadn't seen him deploy it as a prybar before. As she left, she adjusted her satchel with her left hand and the door with her right. I filed it, because I file everything. Mara Selwyn arrived with a half-smile that had bills stapled to the back of it. She was mid-40s, tailored, and carried the kind of grievance that looks lighter than it weighs. She kissed the room with her eyes, as if she had not forgiven the wallpaper for existing. Wolfe asked nothing about her wardrobe and everything about her keys. "I returned the set," she said. "I even made a ceremony of it. Victor got his feelings arranged and watched me put them on his desk." He counted them. "We signed a note." She crossed one leg over the other without asking the chair's permission. "If you're fishing, Mr. Wolfe, fish where the water actually moves. Nico Barash teaches bottles to behave. He carries a kit in his car for emergency corrections. He once offered to wake up a somnolent hermitage at a dinner I hosted, and I told him to leave it asleep and to take his syringe on a walk. He is resentful in little ways. What about Miss Lane?" Wolfe asked. And I enjoyed that he said it like inquiring about weather. "Miss Lane would break a man's jaw with a press release if she could," Selwyn said. "But she hires professionals for the actual jaw. She's too principled to cheat at wine and too practical. To let someone else's cheating get in the way of a story." She gave me a look that said she knew what I had in my pocket and would like to know whether it matched what she had in her. I did not oblige. Wolfe signaled the end by shifting his weight just enough to mean gravity could have him back when it had improved its tone. Selwyn stood, smiled like a guarantee, and left us the faintest hint of vetiver, which I plan to have an opinion about later. Saul called 5 minutes after the hall door closed. He was still a low murmur, but if you know him, the tone has gradients. "Our sedan sleeps at a garage used by Barash Imports," he said. "Driver's name is Milos. He eats with the car. Last night's woman is Anna Voigt, works in Dr. Muir's lab. 20 minutes in, no case out. Empty hands. She left a purchase at the pharmacy next door. Odile gloves, 6.5. Does she like floral?" I asked. "She wears something that pretends to be flowers," Saul said. "Also, Barash met Dane for coffee at 8 this morning. 10 minutes. Plenty of smirking. I relayed it to Wolfe. He didn't breathe joy. He breathed reduction. Elements were coming off the heat and showing what they were when they weren't pretending to be sauce. He drummed a finger once on the arm of his chair, which for him is the equivalent of an aria. "We will have them back," he said. "All of them. This evening. If I ask in the morning, they posture. If I ask at 5, they perspire. Mr. Goodwin, advise Miss Lane that Mr. Cray's problem requires an audience. The corkscrew twists a third time," I said. "The corkscrew has finished its career as a prophet," Wolfe said dryly. "Now it will be a pointer. Bring it. And tell Fritz that the chairs will need to be arranged so that vanity must look at guilt and envy, must sit where it can smell fear." That's how we set the table at the brownstone. No candles. But the lighting's always flattering to truth. Outside, the rain finally decided to do something about the humidity. Inside, we had a bottle that had been kissed by a needle, a glove that knew its size, a borer that told on its hand, and a cast that kept volunteering to be helpful. If the next move wasn't ours, it was because Wolfe was letting the other side believe they still had one. By 5 o'clock, the brownstone had the hum of a theatre waiting on its curtain. Fritz had moved the chairs into their familiar horseshoe, with Wolfe enthroned at the curve like a magistrate, who wouldn't condescend to wear robes. I'd taken my spot at the typewriter table. Though typing wasn't on the schedule, my job was to keep the words in order and the bodies from tangling. The brass serpent had its place on Wolfe's desk, gleaming as if it had polished itself in anticipation. The glove and the alien borer waited in my pocket, where I could feel their presence every time I shifted in my chair. Phoebe Lane arrived first, brisk and unsmiling, leading Julian Cray, who looked like a man walking behind his own coffin. He hadn't shaved well, and his eyes had developed the shiny edge of someone who'd been awake too long with the wrong kind of thoughts. He clutched his leather case, as if the bottle inside might slip away without it. Wolfe nodded him toward the red chair opposite the desk. The others trickled in behind. Victor Almeida, shoulders squared but face drawn, refusing to look at Cray. Mara Selwyn, lips curved with an irony that never quite relaxed. Dr. Elsa Muir, satchel at her side, calm and compact. Lionel Dane, smugness wrapped in tweed, the kind of smirk you want to invoice for damages. Nico Barash, heavy-set, with a smile too eager to be believed. And Kenji Okada, slim, nervous, eyes darting to see if he was in the wrong room. They settled like chess pieces, each adjusting in tiny ways to the presence of the others. Wolfe let silence extend until it began to creak. He doesn't open like an orchestra conductor. He lets the audience feel its own impatience, then releases them by speaking. "So you have all heard varying accounts of Mr. Cray's difficulties," he began, his voice even, grave, and bored. "They are not trifles. 2 bottles of significance tampered with, reputations toyed with, and last night an attempt repeated under my observation. I have the evidence of it. What I wish from you tonight is cooperation, though I can, if needed, proceed without it." That got a shuffle from Okada, a cough from Dane, and a blink from Muir. Selwyn crossed one leg, amused. Wolfe gestured to me. I stood, produced the glove, and set it on the edge of the desk. "Found in Mr. Cray's cellar last night," I said. "Left by the person who opened a Bordeaux and introduced something it didn't deserve. Size 6.5 Odile brand. Purchased yesterday evening by Anna Voigt, Dr. Muir's assistant." All eyes swiveled to Muir, who didn't flinch. "Anna is competent," she said. "If she purchased gloves, she did so for work in my lab." Where she also took a case, I added, that matched what I saw in the cellar. Ampoules and a fine borer designed to leave no mark. Same size borer as this one. I set the alien instrument beside the glove, distinct from Victor's. Its tip is worn on a left-hand angle. Dane chuckled, a dry scrape of sound. "Well, there's your villain," the earnest scientist, hiding behind her assistant. "How very charming," Pfui, Wolfe said, and Dane stopped smiling for the first time. "Mr. Dane, your eagerness damns you. Dr. Muir's assistant is a hand, perhaps hired, perhaps borrowed, but not the mind. Miss Voigt did not conceive this charade. Someone told her where to go, what to do, what to carry." Barash, Selwyn said lazily, tilting her chin. "He's always pushing for tricks with bottles. Who else teaches people to slip gum into a vintage?" Barash's smile widened as if insult were a compliment. "If I wished to ruin Julian, I would do it openly, at a tasting where I could humiliate him and take his clients. To poison bottles in secret, that denies me applause. And I like applause, exactly," Wolfe said. "Which leaves us with motive. Who benefits if Cray is mocked? Who wished to see his tastings ridiculed, his collections doubted?" Dane leaned back, spreading his arms. "Everyone knows I detest fraud. I wanted an audit because I suspected he was buying without rigor. Expose him, yes, but ruin bottles? That isn't exposure, it's destruction. I collect too. I respect the craft." "You respect your reflection," Selwyn muttered. "Enough," Wolfe said, and the word carried the weight of a gavel. "You have all tried to cast suspicion. But the clue is not in who despises Mr. Cray. It is in the method. The serpent," he indicated the brass corkscrew. "It was planted to announce itself. Twice it appeared where it should not. A message. The corkscrew twists twice." The phrase was telephoned to Mr. Cray, the voice amused, taunting. "Who delights in theatre? Who carries grudges with pageantry? Who once held keys to the cellar and returned them ceremonially, with flourish?" Selwyn's smile dimmed. "You can't be serious. If I wanted to hurt Julian, I would have done it at a gala with photographers." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "And you tried to. You engaged Mr. Barash once to dress a bottle at a dinner. When he refused your instruction, you stored the notion away. You had the means, keys, knowledge of the cellar. You had the motive, a grievance over your partnership. And you had the taste for display. Who else would plant a serpent as a calling card?" Her face hardened, but it was Dane who laughed too loudly. "So you blame her? Wonderful. I said she was trouble." "Phooey again," Wolfe said, sharper. "Mr. Dane, your overzealous glee is tedious. The serpent is not Miss Selwyn's alone. It is also yours. A collector, rival who smirks in every word. who telephones enologists demanding audits, who desires Julian's humiliation not for gain but for sport. Miss Selwyn carried old resentment. You supplied fresh spite. The two of you together contrived this. She with knowledge of access, you with appetite for ridicule. Anna Voigt was merely the hand that carried your vial. The silence after that was taut enough to pluck, Muir's lips pressed thin. Victor's jaw set. Cray sagged like a balloon losing air. Dane's smirk cracked at last, and Selwyn's eyes flashed a sharp, unguarded spark of recognition. You can't prove it, Dane began, but Wolfe raised one finger. The bottle, Wolfe said. I brought it out, crate and all, set it on the desk. Unopened since the trespass. Resin traces in the cork. A second puncture where the needle kissed. Your handiwork will speak. Her lab could confirm it, but I will not need one, because Miss Voigt will testify who directed her, and she will not shield you. Nor will she shield Miss Selwyn, who once paid her for errands. Selwyn rose, eyes hard. This is absurd. No, Wolfe said, his voice cold iron. It is justice. Mr. Cray, you may choose whether to take this to the police or merely the court of reputation. Either way, the sabotage ends. The room erupted. Voices overlapping, protests, denials. Wolfe closed his eyes, shutting them out. I stood ready in case fists replaced words, but none of them had the courage. Phoebe Lane rose too, cutting through with professional clarity. Enough. Julian, you'll issue no statements until I've drafted them. Mr. Wolfe, you'll have your check by morning. And just like that, the gathering dissolved, each suspect spilling into the hall, carrying their resentment like baggage. Cray lingered, pale, then followed Phoebe. Only Victor paused to thank Wolfe with a small bow of the head before leaving. When the door closed and quiet returned, Wolfe opened his eyes and sighed. Archie, beer, I fetched it. He sipped, then said, Sabotage is a vulgar crime, but vanity, that is inexhaustible. It twists more than any corkscrew. I told him he'd done well, though personally I preferred mysteries with fewer props and more women leaving gloves behind. He didn't answer. He was already reaching for the second beer, letting the brownstone soak back into silence. Fritz's calf's liver lived up to Wolfe's warning about zeal by not needing any. After the gathering, the brownstone went back to sounding like itself. Soft shoes, honest plates, the orchids whispering to their humidifiers. I made a circuit to bleed off the static the suspects had tracked in, and came back to the office to find Wolfe lifting the brass serpent with 2 fingers and setting it down again as if confirming. That gravity still worked. You were generous with your conclusions, I said, because his eyelids were at half-mast, and that's when he tolerates commentary. Dane and Selwyn as a duet. It fit, but it also felt like you were selling them the ending they wanted to buy. I sold them the chapter they deserve, he said. I did not sell the book, sit, I sat. He was looking at the safe in a meditative way that had nothing to do with money. Our visitor last night, he went on, was sure of her hand until she wasn't. She left a glove. She will try to correct. People who have trained themselves to precision cannot abide a blemish within reach. His eyes shifted to my coat on the rack. You were careless. I was in character, I said. The glove and the borer are in my pocket because you told me to keep them personal. And you hung your coat in the hall, he murmured. You are not a fool, Archie. Do not rehearse it. He wasn't wrong. I got up and went to fetch it, and felt the small jolt you get when your fingers close on something that shouldn't be there. In the outer pocket, a rectangle waited. Paper, smooth, folded once. I brought it in on my palm. Wolfe tilted his head. I opened it with the back of a knife blade. Inside, 4 words in neat block print. The corkscrew twists thrice. Fritz doesn't write like a printer. Neither does Sol. The capitals had the fussiness of someone who has taught their hand to be invisible. There was a dusting along the fold, fine as flour. I tapped a few grains on Wolfe's blotter. He smelled, sneezed once and said, Gum Arabic, pfui. I vote we demote the chapter and upgrade the book, I said, and went for the phone. Wolfe lifted a hand. No, if she is here, she is still here. The door buzzer saved me the trouble of inventing new cuss words. Fritz went, and on his way past the office he paused just enough to say, I will fetch the broom after I see who it is. He does not fetch brooms without cause. Wolfe nodded me toward the hall. I was there in time to see the faintest skim of pale dust on the runner by the coat closet. It wasn't much, but it remembered the souls that had brought it in. I opened the closet. My hat had been nudged, 3 inches right on the top shelf where I didn't leave it. The glove and the borer were still in my pocket, but someone had considered promoting them to theirs. At the door, Fritz admitted Kenji Okada. He came in with his hat in his hands and the apology already installed on his face. "I'm sorry," he started, and then stopped when he saw me standing there with a piece of paper that looked like a bad joke. He looked like the sort of nervous that makes you forgive a broken glass. He also looked like a man about to say more than he intended if you didn't encourage him. Wolfe let him pass like a breeze. "Mr. Okada, your timing is either providential or ruinous. Proceed." Proceed. Okada perched on the edge of a chair and tried to fold himself into a smaller set of worries. "Miss Lane said not to disturb you," he said. "But after that meeting, Mr. Wolfe, I think I made a mistake. I think I invested in a spectacle. Mr. Cray's tastings. Phoebe promised visibility, press, momentum. My firm covered costs in exchange for a revenue share. If he becomes a joke, we lose the investment. If he's a scandal that can be solved, she has a plan for that too." Wolfe's eyebrows went up a bulletin's worth. "Miss Lane has a plan for scandal and its solution," he repeated. "Does she also have a slogan?" Okada blinked. She named the series Twice Twisted, as a pun for corkscrew masterclasses. She pitched it last month. She said it gives headlines something to play with. He saw my hand tighten on the paper and flinched on time. I was fond of him anew. I didn't like it. It felt glib. But advertisers perked. "She named it," Wolfe said softly, and the air in the room decided to watch its step. "Mr. Okada, when Miss Lane used your telephony to arrange coverage for Mr. Cray's tastings, did she also arrange phone banks to tease an announcement?" He colored. "She asked for a short-term account. Spoofed caller ID for outbound. It's a service for campaign calls," she said. "Legal if used properly." In the hall, Fritz coughed. The cough that means someone is in the kitchen who is not me. I left Wolfe to season Okada and slid toward the sounds that kitchens make when they're pretending to be empty. The pantry door was open a measured inch. I eased it wider. On the middle shelf, a jar of powdered sugar sat where confectioner's sugar has always sat. Next to it, a jar that belonged 2 shelves up, gum arabic, the kind Fritz uses to glaze a tart when he wants the surface to shine for a camera. A finger had drawn a line in its dust on the lid. The back door latch, ordinarily smug, looked recently persuaded and sore about it. She was behind the basement door when I opened it, 1 foot on the second step, a hand on the railing, a breath getting its math wrong. "Anna," I said, not loudly. She froze and closed her eyes in a way that told me names had already been tried in her head, and mine fit more than most. "You left something," I went on. "And you came for it. That was sloppy. It was also decent. If decent is what you want," she said, and when she turned there wasn't defiance. There was fatigue. Her left hand still had a faint blush of dust along the edge, the kind that collects when you handle a substance that wants to cling. "Please tell Dr. Muir I didn't use her lab stock. I bought my own. I don't write moral letters to employers," I said. "Come in." In the office, Wolfe did not make her walk the plank of her guilt before seating her. He simply positioned his finger on the paper I had laid on his desk and looked at her until her eyes found the words. She nodded once as if the universe had at least kept tidy minutes. "Who sent you?" he said, not asking. "Spare me the embroidery," she swallowed. "Miss Lane told me there was a crisis and that Mr. Cray's enemies were about to make him a laughingstock. She said if we staged a sabotage that we could expose and blame on the right parties, we could own the narrative and turn him into a survivor. She said it would be a service to the truth. She said Mr. Dane would love being suspected, and Miss Selwyn deserved it. She paid cash. She used a side account from Mr. Okada's fund. She said it was for campaigning. Okada made a noise like he'd swallowed the wrong ice cube. Wolfe flicked a glance that identified him for later. "And Barash?" I asked. "The sedan?" "The pharmacy." "Miss Lane told me to let people see what they wanted," Anna said. "She said to go to Dr. Muir's building because cameras would pick that up, but she gave me the kit herself. She bought the gloves and the ampules from a supplier I don't know. She spoke to Mr. Barash about sponsoring a tasting next quarter. He's happy to be suspected if it keeps his name in play." Wolfe's mouth compressed. "He doesn't like being bored. He likes this even less." "The serpent," he said. "Twice, why?" Anna looked at the coil like it might unroll and absolve her. She said a symbol makes a story. She said we needed a hook the press would repeat. Twists twice. She was pleased with herself. She called Mr. Cray the first time from the office line set to unknown. Last night, she called from a burner and asked me to make a gesture at the brownstone if I could, just to prove we weren't afraid of grandeur. I panicked. I tried your door to see if I could get the glove back. I saw the kitchen. She gestured helplessly at the gum Arabic stain that the brownstone had noticed before she had. I'm sorry. I won't say I didn't know better. I knew. I needed the money. Okada put a hand to his face. For a second, I thought he might apologize to the wallpaper. Instead, he said, she told me we'd brand a crisis and then brand the recovery. I believed her. He looked at Wolfe. What do I do? You make restitution, Wolfe said, and you do not speak to Miss Lane until I am finished with her. Mr. Goodwin, get Mr. Panzer. He will collect Miss Lane from whatever mirror she is talking to and bring her here. Quietly. If she peacocks, I will let Mr. Kramer send men who enjoy theatre. I do not, and this is my house. Anna flinched at Kramer's name and then set her jaw. Dr. Muir will be told what concerns her, Wolfe said, and what does not. You will wait in the front room. You will not touch anything. He closed his eyes for the time it takes an old habit to run its course and then opened them. Archie, I was already moving. In the hall, Fritz materialized with a damp cloth, cleaning a line on the runner that probably only he and Wolfe would have seen. He met my eye. I dislike gum on carpets, he said mildly. So do I told him, especially when it calls itself publicity. Saul answered on the second ring and didn't ask for stage directions. I gave him the address for Lane's agency. He grunted once, agreement, disgust, or both. When I hung up, Wolfe was still watching the serpent as if it might finally confess that it was only metal. Twice was her boast, he said. Thrice will be my indulgence. She will speak here, and then the corkscrew will be hung in the kitchen where it belongs, as a warning against recipes that call themselves strategies. And if she doesn't speak? I asked. She will, he said very softly. Miss Lane is not a criminal. She is a dramatist. Dramaturgy only satisfies when there is an audience. The bell rang. This time the brownstone sounded almost glad of the interruption. Saul came in on the bell with Phoebe Lane a half step ahead of him, which tells you everything about how she enters rooms. She wore rain like an accessory, and a look that said she had already outlined the conversation and assigned lines. Saul's face wore neutrality, but his eyes reported he had enjoyed the drive less than usual. Fritz took their coats with the kind of courtesy that makes people behave if they want to keep it. Wolfe didn't rise. He tilted his head to the chair opposite and let the silence lean on her. She tested it and decided she could carry the weight. If this is about Julian, she said, I'm here to minimize damage. I assume you prefer candor to theatrics. That depends, Wolfe said. Whose theatrics? She smiled like a knife. You're fond of your own. I put the folded note on the blotter so the words faced her. She didn't look at it yet. Professionals avoid props until they choose them. Okada stood from the side chair and forgot how to put his hands anywhere. Anna was in the front room where Wolfe had put her. You could feel her presence like the memory of a draft. It wasn't drama. It was gravity. Wolfe can make a house obey. We'll start at the beginning, Wolfe said. You named Mr. Cray's series Twice Twisted before the sabotage. You arranged a spoofed caller ID account. You pitched a crisis to redemption arc to Mr. Okada's advertisers. You curated rivals. You made sure the cameras saw who you wanted. Then you hired a hand. You set a stage where you could denounce what you had ordered. I saw the muscle jump in her jaw. She made it stop. This is a fantasy. I proposed a playful pun. I arranged coverage for a tasting series, as is my work. If Julian has enemies, and he does, I can't be expected to keep them from behaving. If someone trespassed in his cellar, that's a crime. It isn't mine. I set the glove down beside the note, then the fine borer. She gave them the kind of glance you give a spider, contained but not to be underestimated. Wolfe didn't twitch. Wolfe didn't twitch. Oh, deal, 6.5, I said. Purchased last night next to Dr. Muir's building. The borer came from a kit Miss Voigt used in Mr. Cray's cellar at your instruction. You told her where to be seen and where to be invisible. She's a lab assistant, Phoebe said, mild. If she did something improper, I'm sure she'll say I made her. That's how assistants survive. Pfui, Wolfe said softly. Miss Voigt has already survived by telling the truth. She did not use Dr. Muir's stock. She bought her own ampules with money you supplied from Mr. Okada's fund for campaigning. She handled gum arabic and tracked its dust into my house when she tried to retrieve the glove you now see. You sent her to my door because you wanted to preen. We are not afraid of grandeur, you told her. Vanity, Miss Lane, isn't a strategy. It's an appetite. Okada made a small sound that was almost a word and then failed. Phoebe's eyes cut to him, then back to Wolfe, quick arithmetic, more heat than light. If Kenji mishandled a budget, she said, that's between him and his firm. I don't control his accounts. You directed him, Wolfe said, to open the account that paid Miss Voigt and the call service. You directed Mr. Barish's driver to be where he could be seen. You coached Mr. Dane to ask Dr. Muir for an audit on the eve of the tasting. You planted this, he indicated the brass serpent with a flicker of distaste, because you wanted a symbol the press could print without printing you. Her smile went away, as if it had been rented by the hour. You're very sure, she said. Wolfe extended a finger toward the note. Read it. She didn't like taking direction. She did it anyway. Her mouth flattened on thrice. She let the paper fall as if it had burned her fingers, and then practiced not looking at the faint dusting I had already brushed onto the blotter. Cute, she said. Inventive. It was in Mr. Goodwin's coat pocket, Wolfe said. Placed there when you or your emissary tested my hall closet a short while ago. The gum arabic on the fold is from my kitchen jar, which has no business losing weight today. You are intoxicated with narrative, Miss Lane. You couldn't resist a third act. You lured me, she said, and the tone had iron filings in it. I allowed you, Wolfe said. Lures are used on fish. She turned her head and pinned Okada with a gaze that would have photographed his sympathy at a distance. Kenji, listen to me. If this goes public, you lose everything. You didn't hire anyone for anything. You authorized a number. I handled press. If Mr. Wolfe wants to make a lecture out of a misunderstanding, he shook his head fast enough to forget the air. You told me to brand a crisis and then brand the recovery. You said advertisers respond to arcs. You said the words twists twice would travel. She looked at me then, not past me, not through me. What would you have done, Mr. Goodwin, if you had a client who was about to be torn to pieces by men who collect enemies like coins? Sit on your hands. I made a spectacle controllable. No one was poisoned. No one died. A bottle tasted a little worse than it should have for a handful of people in good suits. That's not a felony. It's Tuesday. 2 bottles, I said, and a third ready. Also, the word tampering has a spine. You can pat it on the head and call it content. A prosecutor might call it something else. More to the point, you turned a woman who rents her hands into your alibi. She took the hit. I'll give her that. She didn't ask for sympathy. Anna gets paid, she said. I've already arranged her a job with a startup that needs lab techs. Dr. Muir is prissy and underpays. Enough, Wolfe said, and his voice thickened, which is how you know you've taken him past his tolerance for slogans. You will listen. There are 2 paths. On one, I telephone Inspector Kramer and present him with your assistant. The glove, the borer, the bottle, the call records, and Mr. Okada. He will come with men who do not care for your diction, and he will take you to a room that is unimprovable by your talents. On the other, you will make restitution to Mr. Okada's fund. You will indemnify Mr. Cray. You will pay Mr. Almeida for the hours and the insult. And tomorrow morning you will conduct a press conference here in my office. He let that hang like a chandelier, at which you will tell the truth. No narrative, no arc. You will explain how vanity and commerce colluded to vandalize a craft you do not practice and do not understand. You will name no one Mr. Cray does not authorize. You will not mention Dr. Muir. You will apologize to Miss Voigt publicly and privately. If you obey, I will not call Mr. Kramer. If you disobey, I will be first in line to testify. Phoebe liked none of that and showed it. She looked at the serpent, as if it would speak in her defense. It stayed brass. She turned the room over in her head and tested the windows and found them painted shut. She tried one more angle. Julian's brand is finished if I say this. Mr. Cray's reputation will survive truth, Wolfe said. It would not survive your genius. She breathed in and out, long like a swimmer recalculating a shoreline. Anna doesn't get charged, she said. Anna will not be charged, Wolfe said. She will also not be rehired by you. I will speak to Dr. Muir. She'll never forgive me, Anna said from the doorway, because the brownstone lets people enter a conversation at precisely the right wrong time. She had come in and stood with her hands at her sides like she was awaiting a choice. But she will listen. And I'll listen when she tells me I was a coward. Phoebe looked at her and for the first time wore something like grief. It lasted a second and died. I'll do it, she said to Wolfe, flat. I'll write it tonight. Tomorrow at 10. 11, Wolfe said. You will need breakfast and humility, and both are better at a civilized hour. She almost laughed. You want a draft? You will not send me a draft, Wolfe said. You will bring your mouth. Saul moved a step, which is his way of making a period. I walked Phoebe to the door. At the threshold she paused and said too low for the room, You're good at this. I am not, I said. He is. I just keep the pieces from rolling off the table. She went down the steps with her chin where you keep it, when you refuse to carry the guilt on your face. The guilt on your face. Back in the office, Wolfe had closed his eyes. He opened them enough to find the serpent, and then flicked a glance at me. Hang it in the kitchen, he said. Fritz has earned a warning more than once. Fritz, in the doorway with a tray, said primly, I never twist twice. He set down coffee and small cakes that looked like apologies done properly. Okada stood and looked like a man who might not sleep, but might learn. Hannah sat finally because the chair didn't take offense. Tomorrow, Wolfe said, we will convert spectacle to statement. Then we will eat, and the brownstone will be as it was. He lifted his cup. Archie, call Mr. Cray. Tell him that the Corkscrew has given its last sermon. The night after Phoebe left had the kind of quiet that tastes staged, like the hush before a curtain rises again. Wolfe retired to the orchids early, saying he required a reprieve from human contrivance. I took that to mean he'd had enough of words that wanted to be more than they were. Fritz cleared the office as if it had hosted a banquet instead of a showdown, then left me with the silence. I poured myself a drink and sat near the window watching the street where the sedan had once parked. Tonight it was empty, but the emptiness had the watchfulness of someone still out there, only more careful. I slept badly, woke early, and made a point of being in the office before Wolfe. If only to remind him he didn't have the monopoly on discipline. He came down anyway, 8 on the dot, fresh from the plant rooms, his face as unwrinkled as a fact that refuses to age. He lowered himself into the chair and arranged his bulk until the world felt correctly balanced. At 11, he said, Miss Lane will deliver her confession. Until then, we must ensure no one else has rehearsed a different performance. Mr. Cray must not improvise, Mr. Dane must not posture, Miss Selwyn must not embellish, and Mr. Barash must not charm. If they do, the statement will curdle. Meaning you want me to put a leash on 5 grown adults before breakfast? I said. What am I, a zookeeper? You are an assistant, he said, as if that covered everything. Telephone them, Mr. Cray first. Remind him that silence will taste better than contrition. Then Saul will see to Dane and Selwyn. Mr. Panzer has the patience of a rock. Mr. Barash will need only to be reminded that I do not find him amusing. Do it? I did it. Cray answered groggy but grateful, promised to stay indoors and mute until summoned. Dane answered with a smirk in his voice and promised nothing. Saul would handle that later. Selwyn let the phone ring twice before answering with a cool, "What now?" and hung up after I told her Wolfe would have no tolerance for improvisation. Barash was already awake, already charming, already promising a quip for the press. I told him Wolfe had specifically instructed me to confiscate his smile if necessary. He laughed, which meant he heard me. By 10, the office smelled of Fritz's coffee and something more anticipatory. Anna Voigt arrived first, punctual, pale, and determined not to look at the serpent now hanging in the kitchen. She brought no satchel, no props, only a notebook where she'd written 6 lines of apology she'd never be asked to read. Wolfe nodded her into the red chair and ignored her, which was his way of giving her permission to sit without collapsing. At 10:30, Saul reported in. He'd cornered Dane at his club, delivered Wolfe's message with enough force that Dane had quit smirking long enough to demand a drink. Selwyn had smiled thinly, said she'd attend, and walked away. Saul said she was the kind of woman who filed silence as a weapon for later. At 11 sharp, Phoebe Lane arrived. She wore navy, carried nothing, and moved like someone who'd told herself 10 times that she could control the stage by controlling her entrance. She stopped just inside the office and scanned it the way a director surveys a set. Wolfe gestured and she sat. "You will speak," he said, "and Mr. Goodwin will record. When you have finished, I will decide whether you have earned silence or noise." She smiled once, not for charm but to center herself. Then she began. She spoke without notes, in the kind of voice that has learned how to fill microphones without seeming strident. She admitted arranging the campaign call service, admitted paying Anna, admitted conceiving the serpent as a hook. She cast it as a professional misjudgment born of ambition, not malice. She didn't name Selwyn or Dane or Barash. She didn't smear Cray. She didn't spare herself, but she didn't crucify either. Wolfe listened without movement, which is more intimidating than scowling. When she finished, the silence sat a long moment before he said, "Mr. Goodwin." "I got it," I said, tapping the typewriter paper I'd rolled fresh for the occasion. "Good," Wolfe said. "Miss Lane, you will read it tomorrow at a press conference in your own office with Mr. Cray present. You will distribute no advance copies. You will answer no questions outside the text. You will afterward resign his account and refund Mr. Okada's investment. This is not negotiable. Do you understand?" She nodded once, crisp. She'd already run through the scenarios and found this the least destructive. "Then go," Wolfe said. "You have rehearsing to do." She left without glancing back, the serpent in the kitchen gleaming after her like punctuation. Anna let out a breath that could have inflated a balloon. Okada, who had crept in during the statement, looked as if he had just watched his own savings dragged out and rescued from fire. Cray called 10 minutes later, his voice trembling gratitude, and asked if he should prepare a statement of his own. Wolfe told him to eat his lunch and be still. When the house was quiet again, I said, "So that's it. Curtain down, applause, everyone goes home." "Phoy," Wolfe said, closing his eyes. "It is never it. Miss Selwyn will strike at Miss Lane for being made a fool. Mr. Dane will find an audience for his sneers. Mr. Barash will tell stories at dinners. Mr. Cray will nurse wounds that do not heal. What matters is that the brownstone has returned to silence. That is our jurisdiction. And Anna," I asked. "She will decide," he said. "Perhaps she will remain a coward. Perhaps she will grow. Not my concern. I prune orchids." "I do not prune people." He reached for his beer. Fritz brought it as if it had already been ordered. I rolled the typewriter paper out and set it in Wolfe's drawer, where his cases end up in neat, factual rows. The brass serpent caught the light from the kitchen and shone with the smugness of an actor who got a second run. Wolfe raised his glass. "Archie," he said, "mankind will always prefer spectacle to substance. That is their freedom. Ours is to refuse the ticket." I told him it was a shame we could have scalped tickets for a profit. He closed his eyes, breathed once like a man satisfied, and let the brownstone reclaim its peace. Wolfe didn't go to the press conference. If Nero Wolfe attends a public spectacle, it's because the sun has elected to rise in the west, and even then he would send me to confirm it first. I went. Saul loitered 2 doors down with a newspaper and the kind of posture that makes doormen tell their shoes to mind their business. Phoebe Lane's agency had repurposed its largest conference room into a chapel for reputations, with a row of bottled water sweating under lights and 3 lenses already impatient for contrition. Cray was there, a size smaller from the week, Victor at his shoulder like ballast, and Okada with the look of a man who has been issued a second chance and is worried it might evaporate if he breathes on it. Dane had sent his smile by proxy, one of his journalist friends with a notebook. Selwyn stood at the back in a jacket that concealed opinions and made them itch. Barash arrived late and found a way to be seen doing it. Dr. Muir didn't come. I approved. We had not asked her to carry other people's foolishness. At 11, Phoebe walked to the mic and let the room calibrate to her voice. She didn't spread blame or garnish the truth. She plated it. She said she had devised an arc, crisis to recovery, and had paid for a hand to nudge the crisis, believing the recovery would sell better if it had something dramatic to recover from. She named gum Arabic, which sent 3 reporters to their phones to check spelling. She named Anna Voigt and apologized to her, a full sentence without weasel words. She named Okada's fund and said she would repay it. She named Cray and Victor and apologized for vandalizing their craft. She didn't name any of the suspects she had considered useful foils. When a columnist asked whether Dane's audit call the day before the tasting was part of a plan, she shook her head and repeated the instruction Wolfe had issued. No names beyond those she had harmed. It wasn't a performance she enjoyed, but she did it respectably, which is rarer than you'd think in her trade. When she announced she was resigning Cray's account effective immediately, the room sighed the way rooms do when a tableau reaches the moment they came for. In the second row, Selwyn's chin lifted a fraction. Regret or satisfaction, hard to tell. Barash tried a grin. It slipped. The journalist with Dane's smile grimaced, like a man realizing the quote he'd hoped for had decided to stay home. Afterward, Cray's hand found Victor's and squeezed once, a restrained demonstration that would have embarrassed both of them if anyone had noticed. Okada murmured in Phoebe's direction, something about gratitude he hadn't yet learned how to sound like he meant, and she answered with a short nod that did not ask to be thanked. Anna, who had stood by the door like a fire exit, didn't bolt. She walked straight to me and asked if Dr. Muir had returned her text. I told her I didn't know and wouldn't guess. Then I'll go wait at the lab, she said, and left with her shoulders level. Some people recover better without spotlights. There was a second act the press didn't get. An assistant hustled me a printed statement she wanted me to vet for tone, and I told her to put it in the trash and buy a verb that doesn't whine. Saul drifted close long enough to say Dane had taken his frustration out on a club lunch and an underdone steak. Selwyn had told a friend she'd been lucky to be spared the paragraph, which is Selwyn for thank you. Varash had already started telling a version at the bar, where he was both innocent and indispensable. We let the city metabolize it. Spectacle digests fast. I went back to the brownstone with the afternoon leaning hard into summer. Wolfe was at his desk in a posture that had been born on that chair and would die there. I gave him the outline. He took it like a man considering the weather report inland, far from rain. "Miss Lane comported herself?" he asked. "She didn't flinch," I said. "No adjectives. She'll be out of a job by dinner, and in a better one by the weekend." Cray kept his mouth shut. Victor didn't stab any microphones. Okada looked like he'd gotten his allowance back. "Good," Wolfe said. "Mr. Cray sent his regrets and a crate," I said, and nodded at the kitchen. "Lafitte we won't mention, and 3 Burgundies we can. Fritz is writing a thank you that will not promise anything rash." "That will do," he said. "And the serpent?" "In the kitchen, where it is now a moral utensil." Fritz came in with coffee and petits fours that had ideas about forgiveness. "Mr. Cray's driver delivered the crate," he said, "and a letter in which he managed to use the word devastated once and the word grateful twice." He set the tray down and added, "I will not hang the brass thing above the stove." "Hey, it offends me," Wolfe grunted approval. "Hang it where its conceit cannot drip on anything edible." He let me sit and stay sat. The office put its calm back on like a robe. After a while, he said, "You disliked my speech to the assembled the other night." "I thought you were selling a solution you didn't intend to deliver," I said. "Which you weren't. You were priming appetites you needed quieted long enough for Miss Lane to overreach." He waggled a finger, the smallest concession to praise he ever allows. "If I had named her then, she would have performed defiance and dragged others into the glare. I dislike cases that end in plays. Better to let her write one more act and require her to play it here without scenery." He sipped. "Vanity will always volunteer. You need only arrange the chairs." "Speaking of chairs," I said, "Kramer will want to sit in one if he reads her statement and sees the words paid and tampering in the same paragraph." "Kramer," Wolfe said, "hunts crimes. He tolerates follies only when they waste his time in a way he can bill to someone else. If he calls, I will tell him that the bottle remains unopened and the restitution complete. He can press Miss Lane for a charge if he wishes. I do not predict satisfaction." He reached for his beer and paused, eyes on the safe. "Take out the bottle," he said. "We will return it to Mr. Cray with a note instructing him to keep it for his enemies and never to open it. It will do them more harm intact." I did as told. The puncture was still a whisper under the capsule, a memory of mischief. Wolfe looked at it as if consulting a dictionary and then looked away. That's his way of absolution. He stops granting you his attention. At 6, the doorbell brought Victor with a letter in both hands and a relief he was not skilled at hiding. He brought also a rumor that Dr. Muir had kept Anna after a long talk and a lecture on the uses and misuses of polish. "Probationary," he said, "but paid." Wolfe nodded once, which for him is the sonic equivalent of a handshake. Victor hesitated, then, "Mr. Wolfe, if you ever wish to tour the cellar under conditions less—" He gestured vaguely, a man still allergic to adjectives. "I would be honored. I do not tour," Wolfe said. "I eat." But he didn't decline the courtesy. He sent it to a shelf with other invitations he'll never answer, and appreciates all the same. When the house was ours again, and the evening wove itself into the kitchen smells, I said, "You owe me an epigram." The case was built for one. He looked at the serpent in the doorway, now demoted to kitchen hardware. "Confession," he said, "is a condiment. In the proper quantity it sharpens the dish. Served as the meal, it nauseates." He lifted his glass. "And remember, Archie, most people twist once to open and once to boast. It's the third twist that untangles." "That sounds like a recipe," I said. "I'll tell Fritz to file it with the tart glazes." "Bah," he said, but without heat. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the brownstone be itself, the air untroubled, the orchids breathing, the coil of brass minding its manners where it couldn't pretend to be a symbol. Outside, New York resumed its noise. Inside, we refused the ticket. The brownstone was quiet again, the kind of quiet Wolfe cultivates like Fritz cultivates herbs. Outside, the city had already moved on to fresh gossip. Phoebe Lane's confession was folded into columns with other scandals, and Julian Cray's tasting fiasco had been reduced to a footnote. Inside, order had reasserted itself. The serpent hung in the kitchen where it couldn't pretend to be anything more than brass. The bottle had been returned intact, and the office smelled only of paper and Wolfe's beer. Saul stopped by once to report Dane's smirk had recovered enough for club lunches. Selwyn had chosen to be seen in places that suggested resilience, and Barash had found a way to turn suspicion into advertising copy. Wolfe listened, nodded once, and dismissed it all as static. "They will revert," he said. "People always do." Anna Voigt's fate mattered more. Dr. Muir had taken her back under conditions that read like commandments. "She will learn," Wolfe said. "Or she will not. But she will remember this house, and that is better than nothing." For Wolfe, that counted as hope. Cray sent another crate, this one with a note of gratitude so effusive Wolfe refused to read it aloud. Okada came himself, paid back what had been spent, and promised to avoid branding arcs for as long as he lived. Wolfe accepted the restitution, if not the promise. "Vanity," he said, "cannot be cured, only redirected." When the last visitor was gone and Fritz had shut the door, I asked the question I'd been holding. "So what was it all for?" "No murder, no body, just a bottle tampered with and a press agent who wanted a headline." "Why did you bother?" Wolfe lifted his eyes long enough to pin me. "Because the brownstone was trespassed upon. Because Mr. Cray's devotion was mocked. Because Miss Lane believed she could fashion truth as she does slogans. I dislike vandalism more than I dislike crime." He leaned back, arranged his hands over the dome of his stomach, and closed his eyes. "Archie, the world will never stop twisting. But it need not twist thrice, I let that sit." In the kitchen, Fritz clinked the serpent against a hook as he shifted pans, a small sound, ordinary, domestic. It was no longer a symbol, no longer a threat. Just metal hung where it belonged. And in the brownstone, as always, silence resumed its reign. Wolfe drank his beer, I filed my notes, and the city outside went on spinning its spectacles. Inside, justice, his kind, deliberate, and immovable, had been served, and dinner would be next.